Hello, we hope you'll be interested in critical realism. I'm Professor Priscilla Alderson, and I work at the Social Research Institute, University College London.
And I'm Harry Hubbard, an A-level student in Dorset.
Now, there are three main kinds of sociology: positivism or realism, that looks at the things and events that we can observe, measure, and count, the social facts that interested Durkheim. Then there are the interpretism and social constructionism approaches that believe we all see things differently in different times and places. Our views and ideas matter more than what we observe in Weber's tradition. And then there are the critical sociologists, and their interest is to observe, interpret, criticize, and also change the real world in Marx's tradition.
So let's look at some examples to really exemplify these three methodological approaches. So to begin, we have positivism, might be called referred to as realism as well, that are fundamentally interested in measuring quantity using quantitative methods. They might ask how many students are in school, how many are in each year, how many friends does each one have, but here we already begin to run into problems with this methodology. How do we define friendship? How do we measure friendship?
So the interpretivism, social constructionism approaches are more useful for complicated questions, and they look at the quality of our lives. What kinds of friends do you have? Do you like some friends more than others? And if so, why? What do you enjoy doing with your friends? Do you have any problems with your friends? How do your views change about your friends? And these are all empirical experiences.
And finally, we get to critical research, which is interested in social justice and the fundamental problems that plague our society. How does sexism, racism, poverty, disability, and the city and rural life all come to affect different issues of inequality? And how do these affect young people's friendships? Are there pressures to be in friendship groups? And then once these questions have been tackled, they try and apply it to create real change in society. So, for example, how do we redesign cities to be a great place for children and young people?
Now, Roy Basker, the British Asian philosopher, saw a big gap in sociology and the social sciences, and he identified critical realism. So, first of all, saw that the positivism was interested in ontology. Now, we will avoid jargon, but there are two jargon words that are absolutely essential to understand sociology. And one is ontology, which is our concern with all being and doing, all existing things and people and structures. Then there are the empirical level, empirical meaning what we experience through our five senses. But this all comes into our minds and is channeled through epistemology, our thinking. Um, Roy Basker emphasized that epistemology is only a small part, our thinking, of ontology, all our being and doing. And he identified the epistemic fallacy, the mistake about thinking that has lasted, he argues, since Plato, two and a half thousand years ago, nearly. And this does collapse reality, ontology, into thinking, epistemology. So, to give you an example, researchers condense friendship and almost everything, the positivists, into their reports, facts, numbers, measures. You cannot measure it. What you cannot measure is not worth researching, they say. Or the interpretivists collapse reality into ideas, accounts, reflections, memories. Their main concerns are the views and behaviours linked to friendship, but not reasons for friendship itself. Why be friends? Well, reasons are hidden and invisible, and positivists only look at what they can see, observe.
And this is where critical realism, I think, really comes into its own. It combines these two aforementioned approaches, positivism and interpretivism, but also adds a third layer um, to our research and understanding. It combines the deeper, real level. So it asks, why do we have friendship? What are our motives, our reasons, our needs? What is the purpose of friendship? Happiness, attraction, rewards, shared value, trust, to avoid anxious loneliness, survival. And therefore, critical realism is a fundamentally interdisciplinary approach. It takes into account history and psychology, even evolutionary biology. You know, why did humans have to band together and sort of take a communal approach to survival itself? It looks at anthropology, sociology, philosophy, economics, politics, geography. So therefore, critical realism is not a method, but a philosophy of all nature and social science.
To look at the three levels of reality from the point of view of physics, for example, empirical experience, the first level of reality, interpretivists look at impressions and images, say, of raindrops and our views of the rain. Gardeners are happy to see it raining, but brides are less happy to see it raining on their wedding day. The next is the actual level. And here, positivists might research the numbers of raindrops, the patterns of their falling. They might look at that to look at the why they fall. Now, since Aristotle's time, for centuries, people believed raindrops fell because of their own weight, their gravitas, the power was inside them, the falling. However, Isaac Newton, worked at the real level. Here, critical realists search for unseen causes and influences. And the real cause for the rain falling is gravity and the hydrologic system. This explains at a deeper level.
So yeah, let's apply this to a more concurrent, a more modern example that I think we can all really relate to. So on an empirical level, interpretivists might look at the emotive response to the COVID-19 pandemic, how different social groups responded differently, what distress it caused. Um, on an actual level, we might look at the quantitative response. So, how do we reduce cross-infection? How do we care for ill people? And then once again, on the real level, the level pioneered by critical realists, try and look at the core, fundamental causation of the pandemic. So maybe we can all take a second to think about what the fundamental cause to the pandemic was.
The unseen cause was the virus. Um, Now, this is critical realism is a bit like reactions to a flooded kitchen. So, interpretivists would look at the anxieties about the flooded kitchen floor, people's reactions. The positivists would look at how people deal with the flood water and the extent of the damage, measuring it. But critical realists would search for the hidden leak to stop the flood. As Marx said, philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. But to change things, you need to know the original cause of what's going wrong. But since this is often unseen, positivists dismiss it because they can only measure what they observe.
So, I think now we can apply these different theories to the various methodological approaches that they would take. Um, Using the example, of course, of a famine. So on an empirical level, once again, normally followed by interpretivists, they would use interviews, surveys, videos about people's experience to find out the meaning that people gave to the famine. Um, for example, for people, for example, in South Sudan that have been plagued by famine for multiple generations, it might be normalized in a way that, for example, it might not be in Ukraine or in Western societies. On an actual level, again, traditionally pairing this to positivists, they would look at the observable and key or measurable events that caused the famine. So, the weather, the crops, the international trade, the cost, the numbers of people involved. And then finally, on the real level, again, this level developed by critical realists, they will try and look at the root, the underlying causes of said famine. So they would look, for example, the political causes, for example, how war affects famine, or even take into account some of the more scientific or geological causes. For example, how climate change and changing weather patterns increasingly affect um, famine on a more macro level.
Um, we could also look at discipline in schools. And at the interpretivist, empirical level, would look at how staff and student experience school. And many of you will have read Lacey's work. The positivists would look at the actual activities, curriculum, rules, costs. And you may well have read Stephen Ball's work on ethnic differences in exam results. But critical realists would look at the real existence, purpose, and meaning of school, the unseen aims to learn and teach, to work and play, but also to produce workers and citizens, to control society, as Althusser pointed out, to promote elite groups by giving them a privileged education with plenty of sports and arts and great resources, to punish and exclude disadvantaged groups starting in preschools, to drill everyone into complying with rules. You must wear grey socks, even if your home has no washing machine, as is true for 1 million children, and they've run out of socks. They'll get into trouble. Or the rule about no toilets during lessons, which causes so much distress to so many young people. And then there's injustice when there are group punishments and there's no right to protest or defend anyone or to excuse or explain why you seem to be doing the wrong thing. You might be very interested in Professor Rosemary Allen's TED Talk, Preschool to Prison Pipeline, about how Black young children are picked out from the start to be punished, excluded, and to feel bad and wrong. We must, these deep levels are the ones that really, really matter in research, I believe.
So, to sum up, um, whilst the empirical, methodological, and theoretical approach to sociology aims at describing experience and view, and the actual meaning merely measures structures and events, critical realism is fundamentally about taking into account the often unseen, real, and underlying causes of social phenomenon and explaining why. And to really bring in the critical aspect of critical realism, use these three levels of understanding, the empirical, the actual, and the real, to change society for the better and fight back against the social injustice, racism, homophobia, sexism that plagues our society today.
Right. Now, we put a few of the reference readings for you to follow up. And the first one is just 12 pages. That's a good introduction to critical realism. the others are mainly in books, and if you use the index, you'll be able to find the relevant, the one things about the real levels of reality. Um, there are many other useful, critical, realist concepts that would help with your sociology and much of your other subjects too. I find it helps with my life. So maybe we'll see you again when we're explaining more of them.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.